Trust in the magic within your body. And when you get out of its way, when you remove the boulders and the obstacles to your healing, amazing things happen when you can trust it. But a lot of people that say to me, oh, you're a miracle worker. I'm like, no, you're the miracle worker. I'm just the facilitator that's helping you to make the right choices to help your body to heal itself.
Welcome to Harmonic Alignment, a podcast that explores the new frontier of energy medicine, bridging the gap between Western medicine and quantum physics, giving you easy and practical solutions. Guided by me, Dr. Larisa Sharipova, and me, Priscilla Koblenz. Join us on a journey discovering your harmonic alignment. On today's episode 62 of Harmonic Alignment, Dr. Larisa Sharipova connects with Dr. Ritamarie. Ritamarie is the founder of the Institute of Nutritional Endocrinology. She trains practitioners in root cause approaches to health. She's a licensed doctor of chiropractic with certifications in acupuncture, nutrition, herbal medicine, specializing in insulin, thyroid, adrenal, and digestive imbalances. She's a best-selling author, speaker, and the host of Reinvent Healthcare. This is such an exciting conversation. Dr. Ritamarie is really talking about one of the biggest topics on the planet right now, and that is metabolic health. Everyone is trying to lose weight, and they're all finding they have issues with insulin and their metabolic health. And she's going to give you the ins and outs and, frankly, an education on what causes that. And it's not just food, it's also stress. But she is a wealth of information. You're going to want to check out her website, drritamarie.com, as well as you can follow her on Instagram. And she has a very active and informative YouTube channel, Metabolic Health and Nutrition with Dr. Ritamarie. Be sure to listen to this episode, take some notes, and share with your friends so that in the new year, we all have optimal metabolic health and we're all living our best life. Enjoy.
Welcome to Harmonic Alignment Podcast. I have a privilege today to talk to Dr. Ritamarie Loscalzo, a licensed doctor of chiropractic with certification in acupuncture, nutrition, and herbal medicine, who specializes in insulin, thyroid, adrenal, and digestive imbalances. Welcome to the show, Dr. Ritamarie.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
I would like to talk to you about metabolic health today. Statistics show that 88 to 90% of Americans have metabolic dysfunction. So let's start with the basic and explain what's metabolism and what does it mean to be metabolically dysfunctional.
That's great. And it's actually up to 93%. It went up from 88% to 93%. So that means about 7% of the population is actually within a normal range when it comes to metabolic health and metabolic markers and specific markers that they use to measure. So metabolic is everything that takes the food and substances from the outside and brings it inside and turns it into cellular energy and turns it into us, right? So all of the processes, and mainly when we talk about metabolic imbalance in this particular case, we're talking about disruption of the glucose insulin regulation system. So the insulin resistance, or most people are on the path to, or actually already have insulin resistance or diabetes. A lot of them don't even realize it because they're just told by their doctors everything's fine. So there's other things that are involved in metabolism, like digestion, because you have to get the food in and take it and get it into the bloodstream. And then you have the thyroid, which affects the metabolic rate of every cell. So those are the key players.
Mm-hmm. And what is a metabolic dysfunction or inflexibility? What does it mean?
Yeah, so the way that that study was done, in order to be metabolic healthy, you had to have a fasting glucose of under 100. You had to have a hemoglobin A1C of 5.6 or lower. And you need to have blood pressure like 135 over 85, I believe it was. So those aren't even strict markers, right? And most people fail that. I don't even consider that ideally healthy, right? So if we really wanted to look at who's ideally metabolically well, then it's an even smaller percentage, right? Because there's a lot of people who don't fall within those categories. And then the waist circumference. For females, it was 34 5 or less and 40 or less for males, which again, if you're 5'2" and you have a 35-inch waistline, it's not exactly healthy, right?
And so what's contributing factors to metabolic problem?
Lots of things, lots of things. Obviously, the food we eat, super important, right? And we live in a society where carbohydrates are the norm, where people are eating lots of bread and pasta and sugar, ultra-processed foods loaded with sugars, altered fats, right? So people are eating fats that aren't fats as found in nature. They're eating fats that have been processed and hydrogenated, and they're oxidizing inside the body. They're oxidizing, and they're oxidizing our cells. They're causing damage to our cells inside the body, which makes the body unable to process glucose appropriately. So when you think about the process of taking food and making it into energy, it requires that, number one, the food gets digested, and then the components, the amino acids, the glucose, the fatty acids, and the vitamins and minerals all get put into the bloodstream. Well, if you have a problem with your gut and not breaking things down properly, that's where a lot of these metabolic health problems start. Once it gets into the bloodstream, the glucose from the foods that we eat needs to get absorbed into each cell. And it can't do it on its own. It needs an escort service. And the escort service is insulin. And on every cell in the body are insulin receptors. Unfortunately, those insulin receptors need certain nutrients, which most people are very low in, magnesium being one of the key ones, chromium being another one. Those insulin receptors need to be in good shape. So if there's a lot of oxidized fats, if there's a lot of inflammation, they get inflamed and they can't work properly. And then we have this like oversaturation problem. Like if these cells are being constantly asked, knock on the door, insulin knocks on the door, let this sugar in, let this sugar in. It's like, they go, no more. We don't need any more, stop. And then the cells become resistant. So that's what insulin resistance is. So metabolic dysfunction is on the path to a clinically diagnosable condition called insulin resistance, which is a precursor to diabetes. So a lot of people are on that path, but they don't recognize it because their doctors, they don't know how to diagnose it or assess it until they actually have diabetes, which means, your fasting blood sugar is way high and over 120, 125, 3 consecutive occasions. But all the problems that are associated with that are happening year after year, decade after decade, actually. So early signs are there decades before they actually develop into diabetes.
Mm-hmm. And so what's the early signs and how people can recognize it or start taking care of it before going to doctor, before having pre-diabetes?
Great question. And there's such common symptoms that everybody just thinks it's normal, right? So you're tired all the time, or you have that slump at 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the afternoon where energy plummets and you go to the coffee machine or you go get a chocolate or something like that. Brain fog, that kind of like disorientation and not really being able to think clearly. Hunger even after a big meal. That I just need more food. I just need some sugar. That desire. After a meal is eaten, that's a good sign of that. The waistline starts to get bigger and bigger, even though maybe your legs aren't and your shoulder, but it's your waistline keeps getting bigger because the fat gets deposited in that space between the belly button and the hip bones. So those kinds of symptoms. And the reason that it's not diagnosed early on is because 98% of the population experiences those symptoms and the doctors don't connect it. And the other thing is they're not testing properly. They're just testing fasting glucose, and fasting glucose is the last thing to change, right? So they should be testing hemoglobin A1C on everybody. More doctors are starting to do that, but they're not doing it regularly enough to catch people. And the one thing they're not testing at all, unless somebody's already diabetic and on insulin, is insulin. And insulin is a very, very, very early marker. In fact, you might see that if you were to test 18-year-olds, right? If you were to test really young kids, you'd probably see elevations in their insulin. And that elevation year after year after year after year is what damages those receptors and creates insulin resistance. I think if only the doctors would start testing people as soon as they get their very first blood test of adulthood, and they tested their insulin, we'd catch people and we could counsel them on how they can prevent the downstream negative effects, which diabetes, but it's also heart disease. It's a precursor to heart disease. One of the leading causes of heart disease, especially sudden death from heart disease, is insulin. It leads to blood pressure. And how many people are on blood pressure medication in this country, in this world, right? Lots and lots and lots. So all of those things. So if you have elevated blood pressure, might be, right? If you have that big waist, if you have that fogginess of your brain, if you're getting that, I'm so hungry at 3 p.m, or even after a big meal, then that could be a problem. You could be heading down that. The other last thing, so one thing that they don't test, even in diabetics, is postprandial glucose. And postprandial means after meal glucose. So throughout the day. Now, we're seeing more and more of that right now. CGMs are getting popular, continuous glucose meters. When I first started using and recommending CGMs, about 7 or 8 years ago, people would you're getting people who are not diabetic to test their blood glucose? Because I've been doing that for, even longer than that, having them test their finger prick, which most people don't like to do, quite frankly. But I've been testing postprandial glucose for a really, really long time and finding these subtle changes and then helping people to reverse things. And all of a sudden they go, oh, I didn't realize my blood pressure went down. Oh, my waist went down. Oh, I feel better. I have more energy because they got their glucose under control.
Mm-hmm. Tell us more about continuous glucose monitor, what information people can get and how they would relate to food or anything else that can increase sugar in the body or insulin or...
Yeah, and we'll go into the other factors because sleep and stress and environmental toxins and all that play a big role. A CGM, you wear it usually on your arms. Some people wear it on their bellies, and it's measuring the glucose continuously in the interstitial spaces. So you can see at any point in time throughout the day a graph of what your glucose is doing. As you see things that cause it to spike up and down, you look and say, what did I do then? Was I stressed out? Did I exercise more heavily than I maybe should have for the state of my body? What did I eat? And people find out all kinds of great stuff. High levels of glucose spikes throughout the day when you don't get a good night's sleep, when you have a lot of stress, family stress going on, all of that stuff contributes. And so what it does is it empowers people, individuals, to take control of their health, to be able to say, oh, when I do this, this happens. When I do that, that happens. I don't want to go beyond that path to diabetes. My mother had diabetes. My grandmother had diabetes. I saw how devastating it was. I don't want to be on that path.
Mm-hmm. And it's like another wearable device. It's like motivate you to change your lifestyle and take some changes, because it's not only food, as you mentioned, also stress can increase your sugar, right? And even healthy food when you eat, sometimes it's considered healthy, but it's not healthy for you individually.
Yep. And EMFs is another big one. And you and I are right now surrounded by lots of EMFs as we're on the internet and on the screens and all this stuff. And EMFs can change it too. And more so in some people than others. Not everybody has that. I don't have that effect from my environment, but a lot of people do. And so they learn that maybe they need some kind of shields. They need to turn off their Wi-Fi at night, right? I had somebody who, she used to sleep with her iPad in her room. And it wasn't even near her bed, but it was like across the room. But she always woke up with her glucose high in the morning. And she goes, well, let me try this. She left her iPad out in the kitchen, and sure enough, her blood glucose dropped in the morning.
So what would be mechanism of action for that? How EMF can affect glucose?
I actually don't know really well enough to say, but it disrupts the natural signaling pathways in the cells. And some people are more sensitive. There are people who they cannot tolerate heavy duty EMFs. Like they will walk into a room that's got a lot of equipment and they just, like, their bodies don't respond well. But I honestly don't know the actual mechanism. And one of the things I'm doing a podcast on is the connection between oxytocin and insulin resistance. And oxytocin is the hormone of love and connection. And we live in a world where people are becoming more and more disconnected, right? Especially during the pandemic and the social isolation. So I'm doing a whole podcast episode on that connection, because that's a huge one that people don't take. Like a hug, just get a hug your pet, get a massage. Those kinds of things can actually help with insulin resistance.
And I think it's more probably connected to neurological or vagus nerve or like stress and
Vagus nerve,
autonomic
yeah.
nervous system, because everything is regulated by autonomic nervous system, right? So it's a cortisol, it's a stress, and if you
Exactly.
regulate stress with oxytocin, so then sugar is going to go down. And as an EMF, it's a stimulate cortisol because it stimulates our nervous system or disrupt our nervous system. That's the connection, probably cortisol and the insulin.
Yeah.
Connection.
All boils down to that cortisol. Anything that stimulates cortisol elevations is going to stimulate insulin resistance. It's our natural protective mechanism. When you have something stressful and your cortisol levels go up, you need to mobilize glucose from storage so that it goes to the hands and the legs so that you can get away and fight. But unfortunately, we live in this stressful world all the time, and everybody's in fight-flight mode all the time.
Mm-hmm. So speaking about cortisol and sugar, which one would be more important, to regulate cortisol or to eat good diet or good food? Because both of them important, but I think for me, I think cortisol is more important.
I think sympathetic dominance is the underlying cause of all disease. And what happens is we try to regulate cortisol, but the food also stimulates cortisol, right? People are drinking their 5 cups of coffee a day, and they're eating sugar, and they're getting this cortisol. So they work in conjunction with each other. But if you just regulate the food without the cortisol, I've seen it. I've seen people with dysregulated glucose looking at their CGM, and they're eating beautifully, right? And then we talk about their stress. Their stress levels are what's causing it. And then we have other people who are meditating and doing all this great stuff, but their food is not good for them, right? Their microbiome might be out of balance. And so I don't think you can separate them. They have to be both regulated.
What else contributes to dysfunction? We talk about cortisol, we talk about the food. Anything else that people should be aware or taking care of to fix metabolism?
Yeah, absolutely. There's 3 other things I can think of. One is movement. So muscle that is trained, muscle that is metabolically active, is going to be more sensitive to cortisol. So keeping your body moving, even if it's just, doing a few squats at your desk or doing some push-ups at your desk, but just getting your body moving a little bits of time all throughout the day, super, super important. The other one is sleep, which I mentioned, and that's somewhat related to cortisol, but there's other hormones that are involved there. The ghrelin-leptin connection, when you don't get enough sleep, those 2 are off, and your appetite is huge, and your leptin is not giving you the signal that you're full. But also, there's other things that happen during sleep. I call it the hormones that dance in your sleep. And they're super important for keeping your blood sugar. And there's been studies that show that even one night of bad sleep in an otherwise healthy person causes a temporary insulin resistance the next day. And when you re-regulate, you're back to normal. But what if you do that every day? What if you're a shift worker? What if you're a new mom, right? There's people who are just not sleeping. And what if you just don't like to go to bed because you have too much to do, right? All of these things affect it. And the last one is the timing. So it's not just what you eat, it's when you eat. So if you're eating too close to bedtime, you interrupt the natural drop in insulin and cortisol and the increase in growth hormone, and growth hormone affects blood sugar levels, right? So we need to have that 3 hours before bed. That's what I always tell people. It could be 4 or 5, it could be 2.5, but the eating right before bed, I always tell the story of my mother-in-law who would sit down at 11:30 every night and take out the ice cream and have a bowl of ice cream and then go to bed. I mean, it's not the right rhythm for good blood sugar regulation. And then timing in between meals. What we tend to do is we graze. People eat all day long. They're told sometimes you have to eat regularly to keep your blood sugar steady. That's the worst advice you can give someone, because insulin is a fat storage hormone. When insulin is elevated, fat burning is thwarted. So when the insulin is high, we can't burn fat, but the insulin goes up after a meal, and then it comes down maybe 3 hours later. In some people, longer, depending on how well regulated they are. And when the insulin's high, we're not going to burn fat. And then they eat again. 2 hours later, they're eating again. So you never get that that ability of your body to get the blood sugar down in the regulation. And you develop a lot of insulin resistance that way by keeping insulin elevated all day long, every day. So those are important pieces. And then timing of exercise to eating as well. Insulin kind of interferes with growth hormone. It keeps growth hormone low. Growth hormone says, oh, insulin's high, so I'm going to stay low. Now, growth hormone will go up when you're hungry. Like the ghrelin in your stomach stimulates growth hormone, right? So one of the things I tell people, if you get hungry, wait about 30 minutes, right? Just deal with it for 30 minutes and you'll help your body produce more growth hormone and it'll satisfy its need for food by burning fat. So that's a good signal, but they can't both be up at the same time. And the body will raise the insulin and drop the growth hormone until the insulin comes down and then the growth hormone can come up. So those are things that we want to do. And after exercise, growth hormone is elevated. So it's a good idea to wait, 30 to 60 or even 90 minutes after exercise before you put any carbohydrates in. And a lot of people want you to have that window, that protein storage window and eat right away. Sure, wait at least 30 minutes. Give your body a chance to actually have the benefit of elevated growth hormone, and then you can throw in some protein. Carbohydrates probably not the best thing to put in that. It's more protein, right? So have a protein shake or, have a handful of nuts or something like that that's not going to cause your insulin to go up.
So insulin and growth hormone, they're opposite to each other. One goes up, one goes down.
Right.
So keep growing, building muscles, for example, you need to have a low insulin.
Yeah, exactly.
And exercising to build a muscle on empty stomach when your insulin is low, probably advantages to build the...
There's a lot of studies that go either way. There's a lot of argument either way. Some say it's for men that works well, but for women it doesn't. I think each person has to find out for themselves because there's no one size fits all. And for me personally, I like exercise better on an empty stomach. However, if I don't get to exercise first thing in the morning, then I'm not going to wait until 4 in the afternoon before I eat something, because I am exercising in the afternoon. So we have trade-offs, right? We can't all be perfect all the time. If we try to be perfect all the time, guess what hormone takes control?
Cortisol,
right? There has to be a balance there.
Go with the flow.
Yes, go with the flow.
What's your opinion on a fasting then? Do you recommend to do intermittent fasting? And talking about regular endocrinologists, when you go in conventional medicine, they recommend to eat every 2 hours to stimulate your metabolism. So what's the logic behind that?
There's no logic. I'm sorry. I disagree with that. There's no logic there. And I've not seen it play out. Now, there are people who have a very high metabolic rate, very skinny people who they have to eat more often because their metabolic rate is going all the time and they have to. But somebody, which is the majority of the population, who needs to lose a few pounds or many pounds, it's not a good idea to be eating every 2 hours. But it came about because we say, oh, well, if you keep feeding it, then your body doesn't go into cortisol mode, stress mode to try to, come on, if you weigh 250 pounds, you go 4 hours or 5 hours between a meal, your body will not go into stress mode, wondering where it's going to get food. You got plenty for it to burn, right? I think it's just a misnomer. It is true that if we go for too long periods of time on reduced calorie intake, like severely reduced, that we will slow down our metabolism. So anybody that goes around and is eating 1,000 or 600 calories a day long term, they probably downregulate their metabolism. Then you're going to be tired. Their cells are not going to be functioning optimally because they don't have enough energy. So that I don't agree with. But going back to your question about fasting, I love fasting for the right people. I love fasting for myself. It completely changed my life around when I discovered it 40 years ago. And I underwent a very long extended fast and it completely took away all my health problems. And I've been an advocate ever since. Not everybody can do long-term fasts. These days, people think of long-term fasts as anything over 24 hours. That's still a short fast. I'm sorry to say. 24 hours, 36 hours, 48 hours, those are short fasts. 5 days, that's an intermediate length fast. And anything over that is kind of a long fast. Most people can't do that. And most people struggle with even getting to 36 or 24 hours. Although 24 hours is easy to achieve, you never have to miss a day of eating. You just eat like dinner at 4 p.m. every day and you're 24 hours between meals. Now, is it a good idea to do that every day? Probably not, because you can't eat enough and then you overeat, and overeating triggers insulin. If you spread out your meals over 2 meals or even 3 meals, and you have, let's say it's 1,500 calories, 500 calories a meal, easy peasy, it keeps your body steady, or even if it's 750 calories for 2 meals. But if you have to try to eat 1,500 calories in one meal, it can be too much for the body to deal with. It's a stress on the gut. It can be a cortisol problem. So everybody has to find it for themselves. Do I believe in intermittent fasting? For a lot of people, yes. For some people who are very depleted in cortisol and their adrenals are burned out, it's too much of a stress for them. So they do need to have something in the morning. There's debate over whether we should do carbs in the morning or carbs at night. A lot of the research I've done says that when you do carbs in the morning, it triggers the leptin to peak earlier, and then you're hungrier in the evening. I just think everybody has to figure it out for themselves, right? You take healthy guidelines and then you figure out what's the best thing for me. For me, I feel best when I eat my first meal at noon. For a while there, I wasn't even eating until 2 or 3 in the afternoon, but then I started lifting heavier weights, and I found that, nope, I gotta eat sooner, and I find myself getting hungry right around that 11:30 time period. Whereas before I wouldn't get hungry and I'd forget about eating. So I think we just have to find out for ourselves. Now, fasting has a tremendous number of health benefits, right? Hugely balancing for insulin levels, for glucose levels, for burning ketones and putting you into autophagy, which is a natural healing process where the cells break down the bad guys. All that stuff works, but you have to also see how the person works. People say, I want to do intermittent fasting and I want to skip breakfast, but I feel terrible in the morning if I don't eat breakfast. Maybe you're an early window. So you eat breakfast, you eat lunch, and then you skip dinner or have a light dinner, right? So we have to find it out. For me, my window is definitely fasting earlier, because if I start to eat earlier, my appetite kicks in and I want to eat all day. Just, old patterns pop in and I'm like, nope, I'm not going to do that, right? So everybody needs to find out for themselves, but fasting can be tremendous. I run a program I call Fasting While Feasting. And it's based on the research by Dr. Walter Longo for the fasting mimicking diet. Only he does it with powders and potions, and it's expensive and they don't taste very good, quite frankly, but it works. I've had people, though, done that where their glucose went up because he's got some rice flour in there, which I think is great. So I created a whole foods version of the fasting mimicking diet. Everybody gets to choose 2 to 3 really hearty meals, lots of fiber in the meals, so you're feeling full. And in fact, some people say, do I have to eat all this food? It's too much, and it's still a lower calorie than you normally would eat. You don't want to do it for a long period of time. But by day 5, they're in ketosis, their glucoses have dropped. I've seen people drop their fasting glucose by 100 points in 5 days. So it's phenomenal what our bodies can do with the right food.
And also about fasting, there's a lot of experts out there, and specifically like difference between men and women, menstruating women and menopausal women. It's all individual. And I think people should work with somebody to tweak their specific windows and diets, and what's your social life like, what's the best windows for you. So it's all individual, and it's hard to do by yourself. So you better have somebody who guide you through a lot of different tweaks and tips, and so figure out what's the best for you.
Yeah. And that's why I do this. I do this as usually a 5-day challenge when I do the fasting while feasting. People could do it anytime they want, but we do it as 5 days. And every day we have a session where they get to ask questions and they get to tweak it. And they, I did this and this happened. This is what that means. I do a lot of group coaching like that. And people learn from, not just from my answers, but from the group. So I find that that's very helpful.
Yeah, I do once a year also fasting for a reason, because people fast for different reasons, for some religion purposes, for health, for spirituality. So I have a once a year 5 days fasting, like water fast for 5 days.
Water fast, that's great. I only did that once with a group because I was a little scared of not having the people right there with me. So I felt like I had to screen it better. But water fasting is great. I've done it a lot.
And people have to be, under supervision of somebody who knows what they're doing. When we talk about metabolism, also we have to mention another organ that control metabolism, that's thyroid gland, right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
what's the function and what's the relationship between pancreas and adrenals and the thyroid?
Yes, absolutely. So the thyroid controls the actual metabolic rate of every cell, as you know. And if your adrenals are either overactive or underactive, too much cortisol, too little cortisol, you interfere with the conversion from T4, the inactive form of thyroid hormone, mostly inactive, to T3. You also affect the receptors on the cells. And so too much cortisol will cause cytokine production, which is inflammatory markers, and that affects the receptors on the cells of the body. And even if you have perfect numbers, you've got receptor resistance and the thyroid can't get into that. So there's a huge relationship between thyroid and adrenals. And with the thyroid and the blood sugar, elevations in blood sugar, elevations in insulin affect thyroid. Elevations in insulin resistance also leads to resistance of other hormones, not only thyroid, but estrogen and cortisol, and all the hormones can develop resistance. We just always think about it in terms of insulin resistance or leptin resistance. Is getting more and more well known now, but thyroid resistance is super common. And I see it all the time where people come in and all their numbers look normal, but they have all the symptoms of low thyroid function. We look at, there's things like homocysteine elevations, which affect those receptors, vitamin A, inflammation. And when we correct for those things, their thyroid symptoms go away. So all of those things play in. And when we have elevations of insulin and glucose, it affects TSH production, it affects the conversion between T4 and T3, and it affects the binding of the hormone to the protein carriers. A lot of times we have good levels of the hormones, but we don't have enough of the free hormones. And a lot of doctors don't even test for that. They just test, TSH, everything's fine. You're not a thyroid problem. Here's your antidepressants and here's your laxatives, and, go rub this on your skin and you'll be fine. And it's not true.
For someone struggling with stubborn weight or energy crashes despite eating healthy diet, what is the hidden metabolic or hormonal issue you often see in people?
I see insulin resistance a lot of the time. And it may be not insulin resistance related to their diet, although their diet might be good diet, but not a good diet for them, depending on how their metabolism and what their genetics are. But a lot of times these stressed out people that are 24/7 in cortisol mode, they can't get rid of the belly because it's constantly triggering elevations of their glucose and elevations of insulin, which nobody's testing for, right? We test for that. And I see people with way high insulin levels, and they're not being told what to do for that. So that's one thing. I think the stress is probably the biggest thing, and the insulin is the second biggest, or vice versa, both of them leading to each other, and they're not moving, right? They're just sitting around and they're not moving. Nobody needs to run a marathon. You just need to walk to the mailbox and back a few times a day, right? Go up and down the stairs a couple of times. Go up and down at your desk doing squats, things like that. We need to keep moving and sleep, right? If you're not sleeping well, you're going to gain weight. And if you ever have a bad night of sleep, and then see what your appetite is like the next day, because leptin and ghrelin are all switched up, and we just want to eat all day long, even though you're not necessarily hungry. So those are all things that are involved. Anything else that you see?
Yeah, the stress factor is play a huge role in any weight gain and stubborn weight loss. And people don't realize that sometimes we live in a chronic stress state, but we don't realize that we live under stress, right? Because it's already become a normal for.
It's normal, right?
That's very important, and sleep is probably contribute to that as
so critical. It's so critical. Yeah.
What are some of the most common dietary mistakes people make that unknowingly maybe sabotaging their glucose?
Some of the dietary things are they're eating too many carbs for the way they tolerate, and they think, oh, I'm not eating sugar, but they're eating rice and they're eating pasta and they're eating bread. And even though it's whole grain and maybe gluten-free, it still has, I've seen it have huge spikes. And I've seen some people, sweet potatoes cause their glucose to spike through the ceiling, right? And they're not eating enough greens. I really see that in omega-3 fats. They're not eating enough of that. Most people, their greens are limited to this little, bit on their plate. Lots of greens. All of those things have an effect on insulin receptors. I have a whole little booklet, like 6-page booklet, that lists all the different foods that help with insulin sensitivity of the cells. And greens are in there. Chocolate's one of them, but not chocolate sweetened with sugar, right? Not chocolate with milk. It's dark chocolate. The greens and things like cactus, even most people don't eat it, but it's, it's a good thing, and we're starting to see it in restaurants. Mushrooms are incredible for that. I have a whole list, like 6 pages long, of all the different foods, and a lot of the veggies. Brassicas, super important for that. Most people don't eat enough. Your plate should be 3/4 vegetables, in my opinion, right? And not tiny little portion of vegetables and the rest is starch and meat. That's not going to do it. And the wrong kind of fats. But maybe they're eating too much omega-6 compared to omega-3. And that's more inflammatory, and that affects the insulin receptors.
Mm-hmm. So when we look at a plate, what would you recommend to clients to lose weight? What plate should look like?
75% vegetables.
Mm-hmm. What else?
Whole food plant-based fats, avocado, nuts, seeds. They could, if they tolerate whole grains. Non-gluten usually work better than gluten. And if they're going to eat meat, a piece of lean, organically raised, pastured meat, or fish that's grown in a non-polluted ocean, those sorts of things. But yeah, 75% vegetables if you want to lose weight. It's filling. It fills you up, right? My 5-day fasting while feasting, there's a lot of vegetables and people can't even finish the meals.
Right. And also with age, we need more protein because we are losing, or we cannot process much protein with age. And so particularly for people who want to stay strong, we tend to eat less protein, even though we need more protein. What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, I think everybody needs to calculate their own protein needs. So the whole, everybody should eat 150 grams a day is BS. It's not true. There's no one size fits all. If you're 5'2", little frail grandma, and you're sitting in a chair, and you're not exercising heavily, then that's way too much, and it causes kidney stress. So we also have to look at kidney function, right? So we have to take all of those things in. The typical is 0.6 on the very, very low end, 0.8 to 1.2 grams per kilo, which would be, if you times the kilos by 2.2, that gives you an idea. But if you're lifting heavy weights, you're going to need more, right? And if you have a kidney dysfunction, I have a guy had to tell him, you have to lower your protein intake to like 60 grams or less because your kidneys are not handling it. So we have to just play into all of that stuff. So I think it's important, it's very important, but I think the overemphasis on protein is a problem. And here's the thing most people don't realize. That little bit of broccoli on your plate, that little bit of kale, doesn't have significant amount of protein. When you fill up your plate with it, or you make blended soups with your veggies, there's a lot. I make a smoothie that doesn't have protein powder in it, that has almost 30 grams of protein in it because of all the veggies that we're using. So legumes are another good source. Some people tolerate them, some people don't. Lentils, you can ferment them and make lentil bread, which is delicious, and it's very high in protein. Soy gets a bad rap, but even if you're sensitive to soy, don't want to eat soy, you can make tofu out of lentils. You can make tofu out of fava beans. So there's a lot of ways to do that.
I used to take your classes, and you always prepare with different superfood and interesting product and food. So I was amazing. So yes.
Yeah, I think dessert that's got protein powders mixed with yogurt, like coconut yogurt with protein powder, and then add chocolate and make like a pudding type of dessert or an ice cream dessert. And you don't realize you're getting all that nutrition. That's the way to do it.
You're also expert in nutrigenomics. So let's talk about genes and weight loss, or genes and metabolism. If people have predisposition to have metabolic dysfunction or weight gain, can they do anything about their genes?
Yes, I mean, the genes are the blueprint, but the way you live, you have to be more careful. I have a lot of the genes for insulin resistance. I have what's called the farmer gene. I conserve, so I don't do well with carbs because my body raises it up and stores it as fat. So I don't do well with that, but I just have to be more careful. Somebody else with a different set of genes gets away with eating M&Ms. right? If I ate an M&M, one M&M probably shoot my sugar through the roof. You know, I have a history in my family of heart disease. I have a lipoprotein A, little a, which is an independent risk factor. So I have these risk factors. I'm not taking chances, right? None of that food tastes good enough for me to compromise my health. And I always say to people, nothing tastes as good as healthy feels. So I don't care, right? I'll just stay away from it. But that said, I can help people make amazing food, taste good, be healthy, and be customized to you. And I teach people how to customize it to them. So going back to what do? You just have to be more careful. And if you know the factors that you have a tendency to, so for me, carbs aren't my friend. I can have a little bit of wild rice, but regular rice will shoot my sugar up too much. So I don't do it, right? Oh, I can have this much lentils with this much salad. Great. I'll have my lentils and I'll enjoy them, and I'll eat a lot of salad to counteract it.
So we can overcome our genetic predisposition, and we know about epigenetics, right? So if we give right food to our body, we can overcome some genetic predispositions. So yes.
Absolutely. You just have to be careful. If you were born with an ApoE44 gene, just don't pile on the fat, because you're going to have a heart attack or get Alzheimer's. It's just very common there, right? So you just start more careful. You make different choices.
Yeah, I have that genetic predisposition, and I was on a keto for 1 year, many years ago, before I found that.
Or you found it.
So I stopped doing keto and I did different modification, and the best diet for me or meal, it's Mediterranean minus grain.
We all have to figure out what's right for us. For me, the diet that works best is a low glycemic plant-based whole foods diet, not oils and no flours. And I have a little bit of lentils here and there, and I have a little bit of wild rice here and there, but I'm careful to combine it with a lot of the greens and the things that increase my sensitivity so I don't get the blood sugar swings. Somebody that has a lot of insulin resistance genes and they have an ApoE44, it's hard because my diet is a little higher in fat than a typical plant-based diet. It works for me, and that's what I help people to figure out, is what diet works best for you.
I call it by individuality. Yeah. Not one diet fits all, and not one regimen and protocols can fit for everyone, and not men and women, age, and all other factors can contribute to your personal approach to your metabolism. So there is a lot of things that people need to know. Speaking of women and also close to menopause, like many women face metabolic slowdown with age because of the hormonal changes. What are your favorite tools and maybe protocols for maybe increasing energy and also stimulate metabolism during that stage of life?
Well, we're going to go back to that cortisol piece, right? We have to get the cortisol under control. And so I love things like heart math, which is a process for getting yourself into that parasympathetic nervous system state. So much more important around menopause. Usually a lower glycemic diet, really getting a glucose meter and testing to see what you tolerate and what you don't, because we become much more sensitive at that time and much more sensitive to the sugar swings. And movement. I heard this expression twice over the last few weeks and I love it. Exercise snacks. It doesn't mean eating while you're exercise. It's small bursts of exercise all throughout the day. Now, I've been teaching burst exercising for, decades, right? You go in and you do 30 seconds really all out and then you calm it down. But this is more even easier than that. You just think about moving. Okay, I've got a 5-minute break here. I'm going to move. I'm going to go up and down the stairs. I'm going to do squats at my desk. So movement is so critical at that point in time. And the sleep. And I know it becomes harder at that period of time when the hormones are fluctuating a lot, but get yourself into bed. And you can control when you go to bed and when you get up. You can't control necessarily that you're going to fall asleep, but a lot of people don't even get into bed. That was me for a very long time. If you don't get into bed, you're not going to sleep. So at least give your body a fighting chance by getting into bed and then keeping your wake up time approximately the same day after day, so that even if you got a late night's sleep, your body is more likely to fall asleep earlier if you didn't get a good night's sleep, if you sleep and get up at your regular time instead of sleeping in a couple of hours.
And also wearing like orrery that I wear, it gives
Yes.
information and you know what's affected your sleep. So
Exactly. I love it. I love it. I love my devices. I use a Muse headband that I wear that gives me my brainwaves so I can meditate. After trying for like 10 years to meditate and giving up, I got the Muse headband, and now it's close to a 3,000 day streak where I'm every day for 3,000 days. That's a long time.
Yeah, amazing. So now there's a lot of options out there
Yes.
that can motivate people and make changes in their lives.
It's a choice, right? And every single choice you make throughout your day, throughout your week, it matters for your health. And it may seem very small, but it adds up, and every choice matters, and sleep is critical.
And stacking. So if you start to do one changes, that just add another and another and another.
Exactly.
You mentioned exercise. People used to not going to the gym, but working at home, outside, doing like take care of the animals. So that is functional exercise. If you have an active life, then you don't need to go to the gym.
You just go up and down the stairs, you go pick weeds in the garden. We've gotten away from that in our sedentary lifestyle. I stand at my desk and I have a treadmill and a little stair stepper off to the side that I can just go, and I have a set of real stairs just a little ways away, so I can actually do all that. Yeah.
And opposite of that, a lot of people, when they try to lose weight, they go to the gym and over exercise.
Yeah.
Happen again, you increase your cortisol because body is struggling. It's too much for adrenals and become again like catch-22. You try to exercise to lose weight, but you gaining weight. It needs to be a balance. Balance is everything.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Balance is everything. Yeah.
So we're coming to the end of our interview. I ask questions to every guest who comes to our podcast. Our podcast name is Harmonic Alignment. So what harmonic alignment means to you?
To me, it strikes me as being in balance with the circadian, the rhythms of nature, right? Harmonics. Harmonic usually we think about as musical, but it's frequency, right? And everything's a frequency. So it's being in balance with the frequencies of life, of nature.
Great answer. Thank you. So where people can find you, your work, your programs?
Absolutely. So I'm on Instagram, Facebook, a little bit on LinkedIn, a little bit on TikTok, but mostly Instagram, Facebook as Dr. Ritamarie, Dr. Ritamarie. My website is drritamarie.com. And if you're a health practitioner, I have practitioner training programs. I run the Institute of Nutritional Endocrinology, and we have a podcast, Reinvent Healthcare, that we air a new episode every week. And you can go to inemethod.com and learn more about, the practitioner trainings that we offer.
Thank you. Anything else that you want to say that we didn't mention to our listeners?
I would say trust in the magic within your body. And when you get out of its way, when you remove the boulders and the obstacles to your healing, amazing things happen when you can trust it. But a lot of people that say to me, oh, you're a miracle worker. I'm like, no, you're the miracle worker. I'm just the facilitator that's helping you to make the right choices to help your body to heal itself.
Great message. Thank you. Thank you for you being here, for your knowledge and all years that you put out there in the world.
Thank you so much.
Are you ready for your Energy for Life bioenergetic Nest scan? Dr. Larisa Sharapova and myself, Priscilla Koblenz, offer personal, private, 90-minute consults to get you back to optimal health and well-being. For more details, visit the show notes or check out harmonicalignment.co. We hope you enjoyed today's episode of Harmonic Alignment. If something resonated with you, we would love to hear about it. Please consider leaving us a 5-star review and subscribing so you don't miss an upcoming episode. Thank you. The information contained in this podcast is provided for informational purposes only and not intended for the purpose of diagnosing, treating, curing, or preventing any disease. Before using any products referenced on the podcast, consult with your healthcare provider. Carefully read all labels and directions. The products and information received through the podcast should not be used to replace a consultation or advice from your healthcare provider. If you suspect you have a medical problem or have any healthcare questions, please promptly call your healthcare provider. This podcast, including Dr. Larisa Sharapova and Priscilla Koblenz, and the producers are not responsible for any possible adverse effects from the use of information contained in this podcast. This podcast may contain endorsements and advertisements for products or services. Individuals on this podcast may have a direct financial benefit to the product or services referenced.